I hit record up there. I think so.
This is REC.
REC. Yeah, you know me.
Is that it?
Yeah.
All right.
Here we are, Real Recovery Talk. I am your host, Tom Conrad. In today's episode, we have Benjamin B.
What's happening, everyone?
And we have a guest to my left. This gentleman goes by Gio, but your real name is, that's kind of your real name. Go ahead, introduce yourself.
My name is Justin Giovinazzo, but I go by Gio.
Is that Irish?
It is Irish.
That's Italian. All right. Thanks, Justin, for coming on. First things first, thank you for tuning in on the podcast app, whether it be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play Music. We're on all of them. And thank you for watching on YouTube. If, in fact, you do find value in this, you can always reach out to us, Tom at realrecoverytalk.com and Ben at realrecoverytalk.com. And ultimately, what we're trying to do here is help you turn your mess into your message. How was that, Ben?
That was on fire, Tom.
On point. I got this monster kicking in.
What flavor? Watermelon?
Watermelon. You had it?
Yeah, of course.
It's good. So what's up, Justin?
Not much. How you guys doing?
Good, man. Glad you can come on. So full transparency, I don't know Justin really at all. Ben knows him a little bit, but we do know one thing. He has a story to tell. Obviously is an addict, alcoholic, all the above. And, from what little I know, I think it's going to be pretty interesting in the direction that we go with this. So just take a few minutes, talk a little bit, about yourself, how old you are, where you were born, and how your addiction kind of started. And then we'll just go from there.
Sure. So currently I'm 39 years old. Right now I live in Port St. Lucie, Florida. I was born in Long Branch, New Jersey, raised in Keyport, moved to Port St. Lucie when I was 7. And that's kind of like where my trauma started when I was 7 years old. So the town that I moved to was a very racial country area. And coming from New Jersey, I knew the difference between skin color, but I didn't know what racism was. So at 7 years old, I was shipped to a school. Segregation was still going on, and I was attacked for being white. So I don't really know if that plays a part in my addiction. I do believe trauma, can be a reason that I sought the substances, but I'm a firm believer of what happens once I put that substance into my body. I have a different reaction than other people. So my addiction started at the age of 14. I was in a car accident and I was prescribed Vicodin. And I didn't take them at first. And one day I was like, I want to see what these are about. And I took 3 of them at once. And I knew that alcohol enhanced the effects. So, like any good alcoholic or addict, I drank some alcoholic with those Vicodins and it was off to the races since.
So at 14 years old, if you can look back on that very first time that you consumed alcohol, was it something, did you have like that, I just found the love of my life feeling that a lot of people talk about?
Yes.
Yeah. So from there, I know before we started recording, you've spent some time incarcerated, and I obviously want to spend some time there, but take us on a little bit of a journey on how you got there, where your addiction took you to and stuff like that.
Sure. So 14, it was just full throttle. Once I put those substances in me, I had a different reaction than, anybody my age. I was off to the races. So 14, I started with the opiates. I started drinking every day. I also started smoking weed every day, selling weed, selling those opiates. I seen there was kind of like a supply and demand thing going on, right? So the kids my age could not get the drugs that I can get, due to my older cousins. I can get, weed, and I can get, the pills from the doctor. So that kind of kicked off my addiction. 15, moved to acid, was taking acid, not daily, but a couple times a week, selling acid. 16, moved to ecstasy, started taking ecstasy towards the end almost every day, was selling it large amounts. And then the time that I was 17, I met a girl and she kind of used like I did. I was always the one in the crowd that used to the extreme. And 18 years old, She tells me, hey, listen, you have a baby on the way. You have your son coming, and it's time to be a man. It's time to stop doing drugs. It's time to stop selling drugs. And it's time to, do the family thing. So 18 years old, having my first son, I'm ready for this. I'm ready to stop selling drugs. I'm ready to stop doing drugs. And she said, she's like, I don't care if you come home from work and you smoke a little bit of weed. I don't care if you have a couple of beers after work, but like all the hard stuff has to stop. It's like time to man up. And this is where I see the second part of step one, the unmanageability kick in my life. I did good for about 3 months, but there was something inside of me that was craving more. And at 18 years old, I didn't understand it. And, after my son was born, he was like 3 months old. She left me and she told me that I'm miserable and I'm not the same person she fell in love with. And you would think that, my life's over. I just lost the love of my life. I plan to marry this girl. Someone's going to come in. There's going to be a stepdad. I'm going to be seeing my kid on the weekends. I'm going to have to pay child support. And instead of being heartbroken about those things, I was actually happy. Like the chains were off. Now I can go use how I want to use. First call I made was to my cousin. And I told him what was going on. I said, what drugs are we selling now? And he said, well, now we're selling cocaine. And I jumped into that. Didn't really like cocaine. Opiates were more of my thing. So by that time, the Oxy 80s were coming around. I got into those, the Xanax, and my addiction hit a whole new progression. So that's the first time that I got sent to prison. I was selling drugs again. One of my friends set me up with the cops. I sold directly to the police at my front door, my parents' house, and a couple, I don't know, they investigated for probably like a year. And about a year into it, they knocked on the door one day and raided the house. And I fought it for a little bit. And, to me, it was always, I played the blame game. It's the person who snitched on me. It's his fault that I got in trouble. I don't have an addiction. It's the lawyer's fault. He can't get me a better deal. It's the judge's fault that they're not looking at me as a young kid who's struggling. Needless to say, I got sentenced to 16 months in prison my first time. And the prison that they sent me to is no longer open. They shut it down. But it was called Brevard CI. And if anybody knows what Brevard is, it was a youthful offender prison for men from 24. And I don't know, we had some 16-year-olds there, but it was supposed to be 18 to 24. And it was Gladiator school, So first time incarcerated, I've been in trouble with the law a lot. But as soon as I get to Brevard and I get off the bus, I look around and I'm like, okay, I'm the biggest guy getting off the bus. They're not going to mess with me. And, I'm in the dorm for 30 minutes. I've been on this prison compound maybe 45 minutes. And as soon as I'm there and I'm making my bed, someone taps me on the shoulder and he's like, go to the corner and go fight. It's like initiation, Friday night fight night. And I go to the corner and I fight this guy and I think it's over. I think initiation's over. And as I'm walking back to my bed, I hear someone yell round two and I get punched in the side of the face. I didn't even see the punch coming and I'm fighting someone else and I'm dazed and I think it's over. And I'm walking back to my bed and someone else jumps into the corner in the little area where I'm at. And he says, no, round three. And my first hour on this prison compound, I fought 3 guys back to back. And that's what set the pace for the whole 16 months that I was at Brevard. If I got a phone call to my family and someone was jealous that I had a family to talk to, as soon as I hung up the phone, I had to fight. If I had visitation, which I did every 2 weeks, as soon as I got back from visitation, I had to fight. If I got canteen, which I did, as soon as I got back from canteen, I'd have to fight to keep my stuff. If I got mail during mail call, that's just how it was, right? So the whole 16 months I'm there, I'm like, okay, listen, drugs are obviously your problem. I turned 21 while I was in this prison. So I was like, I'm 21. So I've never got to legally go out to the bars and drink. So I'm going to go out to do the club thing. I'm just going to drink. I'm not going to do pills. I'm not going to do drugs. I'm not going to smoke weed. And I was on probation when I got out, 3 years of probation. And the day comes where I get off of probation, get out of prison, and I go into the probation office. And when I'm sitting down with the probation officer, she looks at me and she goes, how did you like Brevard? And I looked at her and I said, ma'am, I hated every minute of it. And she said, well, good, because in the state of Florida, there's zero tolerance and you're still under the age of 24. So if you violate probation, you're going back to Brevard. And I looked at her and I could like pass a lie detector test in that moment. And I said, ma'am, I'm going to be a model person on probation. Like, I'm not going to spit on the sidewalk. I'm not going to jaywalk. Like, you won't have any problems out of me. And an hour later, I'm at the house and one of my old friends comes to see me and I'm sitting on the back porch and I'm smoking a cigarette. And as soon as he walks in, he doesn't even say hi. He just hits his pocket and I hear those pills jingling, right? And it was like I went on autopilot, and the big book talks about it, that mental blank spot, right? I have no defense against that first one with no recovery in me. So as soon as he hits his pocket, I hear those pills jingle. I say, let's go. I stand up. I go to my bedroom with him and I go snort these little blue pills. And then as soon as I do it, I'm like, what the heck did I just do? There's zero tolerance. If I fail a drug test, she's going to violate me. So I give in to that and I tell myself, okay, listen, 16 months of just saying no didn't work. I messed up. This is my one get out of jail free card. I'll drink a bunch of water. I won't do it again. And if they drug test me, I'll pass. And that didn't work. Day number 2 comes around and now I woke up that phenomenon of craving that they talk about in the big book. I am craving, right? And I tell myself, okay, it's the weekend, it's Saturday. She might call me in Monday, but if she does, I'll just drink a bunch of water and I use again Saturday and then Sunday and then Monday. Now I'm back on opiates and I'm on probation. So doing what any addict does, I start going through my head and kind of manipulating and justifying and coming up with some kind of way to manipulate the system. So the best idea I can come up with is I'll use for 27 days. I'll go cold turkey for 3 days. Suboxone weren't around at that time. So I was like, I'll go cold turkey for 3 days. I'll drink a bunch of water. When I go to probation, I'll pass the drug test. And that worked for about 3 to 5 months. And then all of a sudden one day I get this bright idea. Okay, I'm going to take these pills with me because after 3 days of going cold turkey, as soon as I get out of taking this drug test, I'm going to jump in the car and I'm going to do this pill because I deserve it after 3 days of torture. Anyways, it's a 20-minute car ride from my house to the probation office. And 10 minutes into that car ride, I'm obsessing about doing these pills. Like my whole being cannot wait to get out of this probation office to do these pills. And as I'm driving, I find myself turning on autopilot, going into the gas station, walking into the gas station bathroom, crushing up the pills, snorting the pills, and then like looking up at the sky saying, what the hell did I just do? Why did I just do this?
That was before you even made it to probation.
Yes.
Dude, I did the same exact thing. I went I forget the exact details, but I was like almost done with probation right at the end. And I had been, dabbling here and there and just not getting caught like you. And I remember I stayed clean enough to pass a drug test, and literally midnight the night before, and I had to be there at like 8 or 9 a.m. The next morning, I relapsed. Makes no sense. My probation started over.
Yeah.
Dude, it's crazy.
So did you go in? Did you go to probation?
So yes.
Of course.
I'm an alcoholic. This is all. This stuff baffles my mind. That doesn't make sense. But go ahead.
Okay. So yes, I go to the probation office and I'm shaking like a 57 Chevy because I'm so anxious and nervous. And I go in there and I had a female probation officer. So she sent a male back there to give me the UA. And I go back there and I fail for opiates. And so the guy looks at me and he's like, you failed for opiates. What did you do? And I'm like, I didn't do anything, sir. Like, I don't even know what an opiate is. And I was like, well, if you look at my charges, like I'm on probation for selling weed and selling cocaine. Like I don't do opiates. And so actually Monster just came out that year, right? So I look at him and I'm like, it was just like, us addicts, we're good, right? And I look at him and I'm like, sir, I just drank a Monster before I came in here. Would that set it off? And he looks at the drug test and he looks at me and he chucks it in the garbage. And he goes, weren't you told not to drink an energy drink before you come do a UA? And I'm like, no, sir, no one told me that. He's like, all right, well, listen, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt this time and I'm going to let you go.
Oh my God.
And he says, if you do it again, you're violated. And he said, don't drink a Monster before you come in. And I thanked him and I left. And I was sitting in that parking lot and I'm like, okay, I can't make it these 3 days anymore. So what do I do? So my best thinking at that time was I'll use for 29 days. I'll use the night before. I'll wake up at 3, 4 in the morning. I'll drink more water, right? And I'll go in there and I'll pass. And the next time I go in there, I fail. And they lock me up.
For how long?
So, and this is where I see my higher power, continually working in my life. There was zero tolerance in the state of Florida, and I was supposed to go back to Brevard. I got in there and I hit those Hail Marys and I prayed about it, and I go in front of the judge, and the judge gave me 60 days in jail and reinstate my probation.
Wow. So yeah, looking back on it, I mean, because you, in theory, would have gone for a lot longer, longer than the 16 months that you did prior.
Yes.
Why do you think the judge did that?
Honestly, I don't know. Maybe he's seen something in me that I didn't see in myself at that time. Maybe he could see through me and see that I was struggling with, it was during that pill epidemic when all the doctor shops around here in South Florida. So
what year was that?
So that was 2005, 2006.
Dude, it was so bad down here.
Yeah.
So I think a couple of things to address in that, and thank you for sharing all that. The first thing I want to say is the rehabilitation, they call this, and I'm curious your thoughts on this since you spent a substantial time incarcerated. Well, people often, it's rehabilitation inside of jails and prisons and stuff, and that's the way that it's kind of touted. Those 16 months that you spent in the, what'd you call it? BCA or
Youthful Offender Prison.
Yeah.
Brevard CI.
Brevard CI. That it didn't sound like there was any sort of rehabilitation in there. It was just like you said. I think you put it good. Gladiator school. Mm-hmm. So that's the first thing, because a lot of times, and Ben and I, even and you yourself now, working in this field and helping people, I'm very reluctant to having people spend time in jail and prison. But, sometimes it's a matter of, okay, well, they're going to die, or the best thing that can happen to them is they get picked up for a DUI or get some sort of drug charge or something, because that's about the only thing that's going to be able to intervene, it seems, at this point.
So Tom and I, we get to see like a lot of cases, people do prison time. Mm-hmm. And I feel like, the media, so to speak, for lack of a better way to put it, puts it out there that there are like, rehabilitation programs within jails, within prisons. But I don't know, man. I've never been to prison. I've only done little jail time.
Sure.
But the fact of the matter is, from what I can gather, man, there's probably not many that actually have any kind of rehabilitation in them. Like, and arguably, people come out worse. The amount of trauma that we have to work through with people that have been incarcerated for years mm-hmm. is absolutely substantial. And you could just tell in their physical appearance, demeanor, everything, like the way that they carry themselves, it has ingrained in them, like that prison life, like their head's always on a swivel. They never trust anybody. Point blank, it takes so long to earn somebody's trust when they've been in prison. Like, and I got to honestly say, there's cases that have come through here that even after they've spent months here, they're like barely starting to trust you by the end, even though you've given them no reason not to trust you. It's so hard to imagine that people won't get out and then reoffend. They're so traumatized from prison that they go back to the thing that made them comfortable to begin with.
Yeah.
How do you get rid of that anxiety? How do you, that you see guys here, though, for instance, they'll go to sleep here and they don't get good sleep because they're always, on high alert. Adrenaline's always going, ready, fight or flight, so there's just so much to work through.
Sure.
And it really, and don't get me wrong, I do believe there are offenses out there that deserve prison time, but to throw your run-of-the-mill drug addict in there, especially somebody in active addiction, like I get it, a lot of the times, this is just my opinion based off of street knowledge, most of the drug dealers that I dealt with, there was very few that didn't use their own product. Like, they were in active addiction themselves, and that's how they held up their addiction, especially with the pill mills down here and the doctor shopping. Like, in a way, everybody was a drug dealer.
Yeah.
You know, you'd go to your doctor, get out, you'd be selling yours to try to make your rent, but then you'd be buying them back from somebody else. It's just literally everybody was a drug dealer at some point. Very, very few people actually, like, were not addicts in an active addiction selling oxys and roxys at that time. It was just a revolving door of people that got caught up in the system as a result of their addiction.
100%.
Well, and that wasn't the end of your incarceration. So you did 16 months, and then you did 60 days, and then went back on probation or probation. But then you went back.
Yes.
All right. So walk us through that.
Sure. So after I got the 60 days, I actually got out December 23rd, and it was the same thing. You know, hey, I just got a slap on the wrist. I didn't go back to prison. You know, I sat there for 60 days saying, just say no in my head. So when I got out, I was very on guard of who I hung out with. I wanted to go Christmas shopping to get my son some Christmas gifts. And I was at the mall and I'm shopping. I'm getting, you know, some stuff. And I get a phone call from a friend. And the friend says, hey, there's a Christmas party at this nightclub tonight. And it was actually first thought right and this instinct. And I'm like, no, I'm good. I just got out of jail. Like, I'm not going to be hanging out with you guys that much. It's Christmas and I need to like stay home and like do the right thing. And all of a sudden, you know, my obsession, my hamster wheel starts going. And I start thinking about how much fun they're going to have at this nightclub. And I deserve one night after, you know, doing 60 days. And I'm just going to drink. I'm not going to do drugs. And needless to say, I call him back and I go to this nightclub. And as soon as I meet him and his girlfriend on the dance floor, he hands me some pills. And I go to the bathroom and I do these pills. And needless to say, there was an undercover cop in the bathroom and he seen what I was doing and he followed me outside and I seen him following me. So I try to chuck the pills and I get arrested again. And I haven't even been out of jail for 12 hours.
Oh my God.
Dang.
This stuff. Okay. Now, you're obviously an addict, and we often say that it's not you, it's your addiction. And I believe that for the most part. But I think what's very important here, so two things. One, and you said it earlier before, you don't have a line of defense.
Sure.
You didn't have it. And we say this all the time, Ben and I, to clients here, to anybody that's in this position. What is standing between you and picking up? In this instance, all you had was 60 days of dry time, and, you know, opportunity presents itself and you pick up. But with that being said, tell me why, and maybe you don't know this, but you have a son. Your son is how old at this point?
He was like 2 years old.
And out of the 2 years that he was alive, I mean, you probably spent next to zero time with him, I'm assuming.
Sure.
So I guess where I'm going with that is, you know, you spent more time in jail than you did not in jail in the 2 years that your son's born. So you have all these things. Your son's born, you're a new dad, you know, you're out of jail, you're a free person, you know, you have at the time, you're probably not thinking, I have everything going for me, so on. But there's a lot of positives as to why you shouldn't do this. And it even crossed your mind, hey, I can't do this, so on and so forth. I just got out of jail, clean slate, so on and so forth. But you found that you still did it. Mm-hmm. Why?
Lack of power. Just like the big book describes. You know, I don't have a defense against that first one if I'm not working a program recovery. If I don't have a higher power in my life that I've tapped into, I'm going to pick up every time. Step one, powerlessness.
And this is why we talk a lot, Ben, and you can share on this about we oftentimes are looking for an external solution for an internal problem, and it doesn't work. You had all the reason in the world not to pick up. You had a 2-year-old that was right there. And Christmas, you know, all the reasons in the world, and you still did. It's easy for us to understand why.
Sure.
you know, and I understand why, even as an alcoholic, you know, addiction is addiction is addiction. But for the viewers and the listeners, they don't. That, you know, a lot of people are listening to this thinking, "Oh my gosh, that's crazy. I can't imagine that." So Ben, share a little bit on that.
This is not abnormal, and that, like, there's within addiction, I just want to point out for pattern's sake, it's not abnormal. Like, while there's shock value to what he just shared, it's not abnormal for somebody to get out of jail, end up back in within 24 hours. We hear that all the time. And the obsession of the mind, it's pretty much impossible, at least for me, to explain to somebody who's never experienced addiction or alcoholism, this like autopilot thing that happens. You're not even, like, you know you shouldn't, but it just doesn't even matter. It's the craziest thing. And like, again, like the not abnormal to relate to it, my son Weston was born. Within 3 weeks, he's being walked out the front door by the police, you know, because the child services was getting involved, all that stuff, you know, lost custody of him. Within 3 weeks of having a newborn son, which is every reason in the world to stay sober,
Sure.
I was right back to what I was doing. And that's where the cunning, baffling, powerful thing comes from. You know, for the sake of the podcast, I would like to think that we could come up with an explanation on why we do this. But the big book says, like, the truth of the matter is that we probably have no reasonable explanation. Mm-hmm. You know, if we're honest with ourselves, we can come up with 100 alibis, reasons, excuses, the big book says in particular, you know, but in the light of what happens as a result, none of it makes sense.
So let me pause you there, because and I've referenced this with people that have a hard time understanding this. And I remember I had a mother in front of me one day, and she was the typical, you know, mom that was saying, "I don't understand this. I don't know why. I can't wrap my head around why he would choose to pick up again." And I said to her, and you know, we'll laugh at this, we'll probably chuckle, but I'm dead serious. The way that I can explain this to quote unquote normies, the easiest, is cookies, potato chips, cake, ice cream. I will stand in the pantry and I will look at a box of Oreos. Every reason in the world I know I shouldn't eat these. You know, and we see this even with people that are, you know, they know that they're diabetic. They know that they have heart disease. They know they have high blood pressure. They know they have all these things going on. The easiest thing I can say, and just to put an analogy to it with food, which is abused on a daily basis, but because it's food and we need it to live, people kind of turn a blind eye to it, the phenomenon of craving. You know, it's one of those things. I will look at this box of Oreos intently, and this is true for me. And I will every reason in the world why I shouldn't eat them. I do have blood pressure issues. I know it's not going to help me, and one thing I know for certain is if I eat one, I'm going to eat the whole row. And I explained this to this mom. And I said, imagine you struggle with this, and she identified with that she was like, yeah, if I eat just a couple potato chips, I'll eat the whole bag. I said, if you struggle with that, imagine what your son is going through, and he was addicted to cocaine. So you're talking, it's the same exact thing, but one is a hell of a lot more powerful than potato chips.
I'd throw it out there like this, kind of a similar analogy, just to tell you like how puzzled I was. For instance, I have psoriasis. This morning, I wake up, it's not bad. But then like a few days from now, let's say, for instance, I wake up and I'm like, oh man, my psoriasis is flaring up. Why is it flaring up? I have no freaking idea. You know, what makes it worse one day from another? What makes me have symptoms one day from another? You know, and it's that puzzling for me. I know I have this this autoimmune disease, psoriasis, just as I have addiction and alcoholism, but I have no explanation as to why it flares up one day as opposed to another.
Yeah.
It's puzzling. It really is.
So, Gio, I want to get into, okay, let's just cover this last prison stint, and
Sure.
then we're going to get into the recovery component. So walk us through that.
Sure. So, after I got in trouble that time, let's just say, needless to say, I pled the addict role. They ended up sending me to a Christian rehab, 6-month Christian rehab. Learned about God, learned about the 12 steps. But as you mentioned, I kind of had some trust issues. Maybe it came from prison. Maybe it came from my childhood trauma. Kind of hard for me to wrap my head around the whole higher power thing. Did good for a little bit, ended up in another relationship, had another son, got engaged, and ended up relapsing. Needless to say, I ended up violating probation again, going away for 27 more months. Same thing, in prison 27 months, just say no. The day comes for me to get out. I'm back off to the races. This time I have no probation holding me back. And things got bad from that point forward. And I was dating a girl, and her family stepped in and said, if you don't go to treatment, we're going to take your kids away. And I looked at her and I told her, I'm like, listen, there's no hope for me. I'm a junkie for some reason. I can't get sober. I've tried. There's hope for you. Go to treatment, and, I'll go on to the bitter end. And she wouldn't leave to go to treatment unless I went somewhere. So I knew that Christian rehab would take me because I didn't have insurance. And I called them and they said they'd take me in the next morning. So she leaves to go to treatment, and I figured one last night to go have some fun. Needless to say, did a lot of drugs, did a lot of stupid things, committed some crimes, and land in jail again. And while I'm in there, she starts writing me and telling me how great recovery is and how great this treatment center is and all these things she's learning. And, once again, I felt like maybe it was possible for her, but not for me. Needless to say, my dad bonded me out for Thanksgiving, and she's back, in our hometown, and she's going to IOP, and she has a sponsor, and she's going to these young people meetings. And I go to one of these young people meetings with her, and I walk in and I see people just like me. It's not just alcoholics, it's people with addictions as well. And they're my age and they're having fun. So I came in and I got a sponsor. I got a home group. I made a start, but like the big book says, I failed to enlarge my spiritual life, and I relapsed. And I committed more crimes, and I land back in jail again while I'm on bond. And they had a drug program in there at that time, and I had been through there once before, and it wasn't that good. And I sign up just because I know it's kind of easy time to do in the jail. And I'm in there, and I sound like a parakeet. I'm regurgitating stuff I heard in the meetings, and the recovery's up here, but it's not here yet. Anyways, needless to say, one day the lawyer comes to see me, and they look at me, and she's like, listen, I got your offer from the state attorney. And she's like, this is your 3rd time going to prison, so he's offering you a habitual felony offender sentence and a 30-year mandatory day-for-day sentence.
Hang on a second. Break that down, because I want to understand that.
Sure. I was there for felonies that were 15-year mandatory sentences. So the state attorney, because it was my 3rd time getting in trouble and going to prison, and he offered me, he enhanced my sentence to a habitual felony offender. And that's anybody in the state of Florida who's gone to prison 3 times. They can earn that if the state attorney or judge sees fit.
Earn that as if, like, it's not a badge of honor, meaning you're a habitual offender.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
So I looked at her and I said, well, I'm not taking this deal. Go get me a better deal. And she looked at me and she goes, I guess you're not getting what I'm saying here. Like, this is what you're getting. I remember sitting there, and there's a part in the big book in Bill's story where he talks about like quicksand stretching all around him. And it just, that's how it felt in that room. And I said, my addiction took me too far this time. There's no coming back. Like, I played with fire and I got burned. And it killed me inside because I knew deep down I was a good person. I knew I deserved good, but for some reason that powerlessness in my life was so strong, I could not put the substance down. So needless to say, I walk back to the dorm and I jump on the phone, and the first person I call is that girlfriend. And she says, me and you need to talk. And I said, yeah, we do. And she goes, well, let me go first. She goes, my sponsor said we're toxic, so I'm breaking up with you. And I'm like, well, good, because I'm getting 30 years. And I hang up on her. And then the second phone call is to my parents. My mom's not talking to me at this time. She's pretty much done with me, but my dad was always there. Anyways, I call home and my mom answers and she goes, listen, the lawyer just talked to your father and your father had a heart attack while he was on the phone with your lawyer. I don't know what your lawyer said to him, but you killed your father. Don't call back here ever again. And she hangs up on me. And then I have one phone call left, and that's to my youngest son's mother. And when I call her, she answers and she says, listen, I just hung up with your other son's mother. Both of the kids are acting out at home. They're acting out of school. And she goes, you did this to them again. She goes, don't call back here till you get your life together. And she hangs up on me. And that was the last phone call I had. That was the last lifeline, you know? And I'm sitting there and I'm like, not only am I facing 30 years, I'm getting 30 years. But everybody's given up on me and the news probably killed my father. And I walk up to my jail cell and I start planning my suicide. So I had it to where there was a way where I could do it at a specific time. Nobody would be able to get to me by the time that it was done. And I was laying there under my blanket with my sheet tied around my neck. And I'm waiting, like timing this. And all of a sudden I get this little calm voice in my head that says, listen, your dad didn't die. He's on his way to the hospital. So if you kill yourself, your dad might actually have a heart attack and die. Or if your dad does die, don't be selfish because your family's going to be planning 2 funerals. Then I was like, well, if I get to 30 years, I could watch my kids grow up through visitation and pictures. So it's not like the end of the world. And I was like, let me just wait to see if I get these 30 years. So, that was right around count time. So 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. is count time. They have the door shut. 8 o'clock, the doors pop, and this volunteer came in to bring a AA meeting. So I go down the stairs and I'm sitting in this AA meeting and like my stomach's just churning, like all these emotions, right? My head's a mess. And finally, for the first time ever, I raised my hand and I got honest in an AA meeting. And I told him what was going on in my life, how I was facing 30 years. My family's leaving me. Nobody's there for me. I've did it, you know? And I said everything. Anyways, after that meeting, the sponsor or the volunteer came up to me and he said, how about going through these 12 steps? You know, how about I meet you every Wednesday in the chapel and I'll take you to the 12 steps? And I said, yes, you know, so the next week comes around and he gave me like a little assignment to do for step 1 and we were going to meet and the counselor walks in and it's a Monday. And so the counselor's joking about this great weekend he had. And someone's like, well, what are we doing for group today? And he goes, it's powerlessness week. And somebody else says, why are we devoting a whole week to step 1? And then he says, because if I can get you to do step 1 100%, I guarantee you'll never drink and drug again. So I raise my hand and I say, so you're telling a hardcore junkie like me, if I do step 1 100%, you guarantee I'll never drink and drug again. And he leans in and he's a couple feet from my face. He looks me dead in the eye and he says, yes. And I say, I call you. I'm going to give it 100%. Let's see if your guarantee comes true. Needless to say, as he's breaking down that Alcoholics Anonymous book that week, I finally got my answers of why I couldn't stop using. You know, I got to understand what it meant to be an alcoholic and addict. And not only that, my biggest reservation is I knew that drugs had me down for the count, but I didn't think alcohol did. And I realized I drink exactly like the big book describes. And alcohol would always be the thing that took me back to the drugs when I stopped doing drugs. So I made my step 1. I did my step 1 there. I went through the remainder of the steps with my sponsor, but my 5th step is where I had my spiritual awakening. So, my sponsor, I guess, is what you consider an old timer. In the beginning, I didn't trust him. I'm the hardcore junkie that grew up in the pill epidemic. He's like an old school alcoholic that maybe did some hashish, maybe some acid, maybe smoked some weed, different era. And my 4th step wasn't the hard part. Like I knew all the bad things I did. I knew all the resentments. I knew all my fears. Like I knew all that stuff. But my 5th step was hard because it was scared I was scared to get vulnerable and honest with another man and tell him what a piece of crap I was. Anyways, we're sitting in the chapel of the jail and, as I'm saying everything to him and I'm confessing it and, it was supposed to be an hour long. It ended up being an hour and 15 minutes. So the officer stood in during the fifth step. The last 15 minutes, kept hitting his watch because he had another inmate that had to come up there. And as soon as we got done, my sponsor said, "Is that it?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "The good news is I forgive you, and so does God." Right then and there, I had my spiritual awakening, white light spiritual awakening. So the officer said, "You guys done?" We said, "Yes." The officer literally grabbed me by the shoulders, picked me up by the chair, and he said, "Come on." And he starts yelling at me that we took 15 minutes longer than we were supposed to. So anyways, as we're walking through the jail, to kind of paint a picture for you guys, the windows are up real high. It's raining outside. It's gray. The lighting in the hallway is real bad. And the walls are supposed to be white, but they're dirty, kind of yellow looking white because they don't paint them that often. And as I'm walking through the halls, the walls were glowing like fluorescent white. And I remember looking at the officer. I'm like, "Did you guys just paint the walls?" And he's like, "No, why?" And I'm like, "The walls, they're glowing." And he's like, I always joke about it when I tell my story, but he gave me this look, he cocked his head back and gave me a look like, "What kind of psych meds are you on?" And I go back to the dorm, and the guys instantly seen a change in me. One of my friends said something was different about me. And later on, it was pointed out in Bill's story where Bill opens the door for Ebby, and he says there was something different in his eyes. That was my experience. As soon as I got in the door, my friend said, "There's something different about you." And the only thing I could say is, I'm like, "I feel like I'm high." And he's like, "What?" I'm like, "I feel like electricity is going through my body." And he's like, "What?" And I'm like, "I just did my fifth step." And he knew right then and there. So it was confirmed by a couple other volunteers that came in that I had my spiritual awakening. And that's when I seen recovery was for real. And I've been on fire ever since. I ended up going through the rest of the steps with my sponsor. I stayed in that drug program. It was a 90-day drug program. I stayed in there 7 months total. They kept me on as a mentor, mentoring the other men. And then the day came where the lawyer came and offered me 10 years. They went down to 10 years, and I refused that. And the emergency shipped me off to court. I had made the state attorney mad by not taking the 10. And as I'm sitting in front of the judge, the state attorney walks over to the judge and hands him a paper to habitual felony offender me and give me the 30 years because I didn't take the 10. And my lawyer won't even look at me like they're working together. She's mad. He's mad that I didn't take the 10. And I plea out to the judge. And this was the first time ever I sat in front of a courtroom and I took accountability for my actions. I told the judge I did it. I told the judge that I did it under the influence of drugs and alcohol, but I said I'm not making excuses for that. And I broke down what recovery meant to me and what recovery did to me at that point. And I begged him. I said, for the first time ever, I'm willing to change my life. And I put the work in and I have changed. And I said, please give me another chance. So the judge takes a recess and he comes back in and he says, I don't know why I'm going to do this, but I'm going to give you a 6-year prison sentence followed by 4 years of probation, which is a total of 10 years in the Department of Corrections, habitual felony offender. And needless to say, I end up going to prison. And when I go to prison, this is my 3rd time. And it was different like any other time. Now the officers don't get paid that much. So the officers don't care what goes on. There's drugs everywhere. There's real street alcohol in there that the officers bring in because they're not making any money. So they could sell a little bottle of liquor, cheap liquor for $100 and make $90 profit, So it's just like one big party. And when I get there, I'm like, God, why did you get me sober to bring me to this? You know what I mean? I'm like, any other time I would have loved the partying and the drugs. I said, but this time it's like chaos and I'm trying to be sober. And I had 2 decisions. I can either not do anything proactive for my recovery and fall back into my addiction, or I can hit the ground running. And that's what I chose to do. I jumped into AA, in prison AA. I started chairing meetings. I started sponsoring a couple guys while I was in there. I started writing articles for the Alcoholics Anonymous Grapevine magazine. I got 5 published. And then one day, one of my sponsees came to me and he said, why don't you go teach this IOP program and be like an inmate facilitator? And at first, I didn't want anything to do with clinical recovery because I was so hardcore AA. But my sponsor said anytime an opportunity presents itself to go pray on it. So I go talk to the clinical director and they love me. I love them. I start facilitating these groups in prison. And that kind of goes back to what you guys were talking about with the rehabilitation. They have 83 guys in this program. So it's 42 in the morning with me as the group facilitator, 42 in the afternoon with me as the group facilitator. And they're court ordered there because they have drug charges. They don't want recovery. I'm in the dorm with them. I see who's getting high. I see who's selling drugs in there. And there's not many people that like actually want recovery and want to change. You know, out of 42 guys, maybe 5 really want it, you know, so it was kind of hard facilitating those groups. So I had to find a way to get through to these guys. Needless to say, one of the counselors talked to an organization and told them that she wanted to help me get my CAC. They were willing to work with me while I was in prison. And another organization stepped in. They paid for it. After 16 months of doing the work, I got my CAC while I was in prison.
For the listeners, what's a CAC?
Certified Addictions Counselor. I'm nationally certified through an organization out of Philadelphia, which was, God opened that door. You know what I mean? Like I didn't think it was possible. It just happened. The counselors ended up helping me. And then needless to say, when the warden of that facility and the officers found out that the drug program helped me get my CAC, they actually called me into the warden's office and they told me, how dare I change my life? How dare I help other people? I'm a piece of crap. I'm always going to be a piece of crap and a junkie. And they told me that they were going to have me off that prison compound in 2 weeks. And the officer said, you're either going to have drugs on you, you're going to have a cell phone, you're going to have a shank, but we're going to have you out of here. And 2 weeks to the day, they tried to say that I had drugs on me and they got me out of there for changing my life. And, you know, I get sent to another prison and I go there and nobody's in recovery. Nobody. And then I end up meeting one guy that has a AA symbol tattooed on him, and me and him start clicking, and then they ship him out. So I was left alone to myself. You know, it's just me, my higher power, and my program of action. And I stayed there for 11 months, and I made it through it. I made it through all the chaos alone in prison, surrounded by drugs and chaos. And that's not a me thing. That's my recovery program. Like that's just the power of recovery, that it works. And then I ended up getting shipped to a work release program, which is like a halfway house in a sense. You know, you get to have a real job, get to go home on the weekends for 8 hours, stuff like that. I got connected with my sponsor again, started going to meetings, started getting connected with the community. The day came when I got out, and right around the time I got out of prison is when COVID started. So I had just started working in treatment as an IOP group facilitator. You know, I just got established in the rooms up here, and I started sponsoring a couple guys, and then all of a sudden COVID hits and these clubhouses are shutting down. So me and one of my friends, we made a decision. Either we find some places to hold these meetings and we take some risk breaking that 6-person in a room rule, and we work on saving some alcoholics and addicts, or we sit back and do nothing. And we jumped in. We started a couple meetings. We had a couple places that would stay open for us. We had a park that was outside, and the sheriffs actually gave us permission to have meetings there 7 days a week. You know, they knew that there would be more trouble on their hands if people were relapsing, you know. And then one day, you know, my dad comes home and he tells us that he has stage 4 lung cancer, you know. So that was probably the hardest thing I've been through in my recovery. You know, watching the strongest man I know, the man that's always been there for me no matter what. I watched him dwindle. You know, he lost 100 pounds. I watched him get like gray. He had a seizure because the cancer had pushed up towards his brain. He fell out, knocked his teeth out. You know, he was mumbling like a baby, wasn't making sense. And then the day came when he passed away. You know, hardest thing for me, I'd never thought about having a drink or drug, but there was times where I just wanted to run away from everybody because the pain was so much, the internal pain. But the community was there for me. You know, I was honest. I let them know where I was at. If I didn't answer the phone, if I didn't want to talk to anybody, I would text them and say, listen, I just don't want to talk, but I'm sober and I'm good. You know, and I made it through that. Little bit by little bit, I transitioned into being a therapist in treatment. I found out that I really love it. And it's kind of crazy, like the timing, right? And to me, like my higher power, like did this. But when my dad passed away, I realized it triggered a lot of my childhood trauma. And at 5 years sober, I thought maybe I was just grieving still. And I went to talk to another therapist friend of mine, and it started as grief and loss therapy. And then it turned into childhood trauma therapy. And at the same time, I had tried to go through the steps again with my sponsor, and my sponsor, he's like, you've been through the steps. It's not re-going through the steps. You're lacking somewhere in your program. So we walked down the steps backwards and we got to step 4. And I'm like, well, I don't have any resentments. And I talked to another friend of mine. He goes, what about fears? He's like, where's your fears at? Like, did you do a thorough fear inventory? And I'm like, well, what's a thorough fear inventory? And he broke it down to me. So the same time I'm going through childhood trauma therapy, I'm doing this intense fear inventory, and I see this correlation, right? And I could trace some of these fears all the way back to childhood and how I've been running off these fears. And that really helped me become a better therapist, going through that work myself. Because a client would come in, we'd start talking, and I'd be like, boom, there's your problem. And they're like, how do you know? And I'm like, because that's me, you know? So some of the people that, you know, some of my clients and some of the people that I knew, they kind of pushed me to publish a book. And I ended up publishing a book on the fear inventory and trauma.
What's that book called?
Fear, it's abbreviated, and then Face Everything and Rise. So, you know, that's helped me kind of on a whole new level get through to people, you know, because what I do is I kind of break down like a thorough fear inventory and like how to trace it. But then I use my story for people to identify, right? And I'm like totally honest, open, and vulnerable, right? And I have a lot of people reach out to me and they're like, Gio, like I struggle with this too, but like I've been scared to talk about it. And I'm like, but that's the thing, right? Like if you don't talk about it and you don't get it out, you're still holding on to it, you know? And really like that just helped me continue to grow, you know? My whole program this day, I would say rest upon helping the newcomer, right? Because I know what it's like, and you guys heard my story. I know what it's like to feel hopeless. People didn't want to help me because I was so bad. I'd go into a room, I'd feel like, you know, like the trust issues, right? I'd go into this room of Alcoholics Anonymous and you tell me I have to be open and honest and vulnerable with these people, but I can't trust them because I'm holding on to all this baggage, right? I got PTSD from prison. I got childhood trauma. You know, I got relationship issues because my addiction, you know, every girl I love leaves me because I can't keep, you know, I can't stay sober more than 24 hours, you know? So I come in with all this baggage and you're telling me I have to come into this recovery community and trust these people. And it's like, that's the biggest thing I see people go back out and relapse. And it's like always hard for me to invest in somebody, whether it's in my home group, it's in meetings, it's in my, you know, I'm sponsoring them or it's a client. But like, it always tears me up to see somebody come in, make that beginning and then go back out. And with this fentanyl epidemic, they might not come back. You know, they might go out there and die.
There was a lot there.
Sorry.
No, it was awesome. Kind of like last episode, Tom was saying, usually he's sitting there thinking of questions, but
you know what
I'm just listening.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the coolest things about this, and this is probably because I've never spent a day, I was in handcuffs once.
Sure.
And it was, you know, when I got my DUI, and that's the extent of my legal issues. You know, I got a DUI, but they took me straight to the hospital. So I've never been to jail. So anytime I talk to people that have spent substantial time in jail, I get intrigued because it was hard enough for me to get sober, and to see somebody that has spent, I think, and we talked before we started recording, the better part, if not more than really 4 years behind bars. But if math serves me correctly, which a lot of times it doesn't, was about a year and a half of that clean inside jail because you were working the programs and doing the IOPs and stuff like that.
Sure. The whole time was clean time.
Okay. I guess so I'm looking at the 16 months. Okay. So let's differentiate between clean and in recovery. You know what I mean? So like the first 2 stints, the 16 months and then the 60 days, you were just white knuckling it.
I was abstinent.
Just getting through it. But that second time is when you discovered your purpose. You know, you discovered AA, you discovered the sense of community. But then the interesting thing about that is you lost the community. Because, you spent all that time in jail for the 11 months, I think, and it was just you.
Mm-hmm.
That's powerful because it's another testament to like what this can do to people, that we hear it a lot, but no matter how far down the scale you have gone, I don't know the rest of it, but you're a symbol of somebody that you had every reason in the world to not get clean. You were facing 30 years in prison, and I can only imagine myself seeing or hearing you're going away for 30 years. in my mind, that's it. Life's over. You know, and the crazy thing is, and I think that was going through your mind, hence the suicidal ideations. But then God intervened right when needed to.
Sure.
You know, and it's one of those things you get chills, you know, and man, it's cool. And to see where you are now, like, and that's the cool thing about this podcast, because I didn't know you literally, we met for 10 minutes before this, you know, and everybody's story, you know, even prior to pressing record, you know, we even said it here, what direction are we going to go? And we really couldn't come up with anything other than you were in prison. And I'm like, all right, he was in prison. We're going to talk about that. But your story is so powerful. And I'm actually in communication with a mom right now who is an active listener of the podcast. And I know she's going to listen to this episode. And her son is currently in jail. And I know she's going to listen to this episode and she's going to hear the things that you shared about what jail is really like. And she's going to be very nervous and she's going to be freaked out because you didn't paint a picture of, oh, you know, I found my recovery in jail type thing. You know, you did a lot of time in there and you got in fights, there was drugs, there was so on and so forth. So I know for fact that hearing this, she's going to be scared and she's actively involved with her son's case. But I still, with that being said, I don't want her to stray away from the plan that her and I have talked about.
Sure.
Because, and your story proves it, you needed to be there in order for this to sink in. I think that's a fair statement.
No, I definitely believe, and looking back in hindsight, I believe that God had me stripped of everything and from everybody to get my attention. You know, because looking back in my life, I've had so many times where God has intervened and I'm like, thanks God, back to using, you know? So I think that's what happened is he's like, let me hit him with the atomic bomb and get his attention. And that's what happened.
The interesting thing is too, this kid that's in jail, your both of your stories are so similar. And as a matter of fact, when she does reach out to me, I may connect you guys because you can probably do a lot better of a job navigating her through this than I can. Her son has a girlfriend. And even to this day in jail, he's like, you know, she's going to rehab. She's good. You know, I'm going to, you know, I don't need to go to rehab. When I get out of here, my job is going to be to help her, those sorts of things. And I've tried talking to her and I know she's receptive to what I'm saying, but motherly instinct is there. You know, she's paying a lot of money for an attorney to help navigate this for him. So I'm going to do that. And I'm not going to say her name on the air, but you know who you are. When you reach out, I'm going to connect you and Geo so you guys can kind of talk this through. But man, that's a powerful story, dude. I mean, I'm glad that you shared that with everybody. Ben, what do you got?
I'll just say this. You know Matt Anderson.
Yes.
There's yourself, you know, and a lot of these guys that I look up to in my recovery, such powerful stories, and I just got to touch on it. I can tell by the language that you use, you know that big book back and forth. I mean, if you're a listener and you're not familiar with the big book, he quoted it several times, but didn't come out and say, like, hey, I'm quoting the big book here. Those steps work. Like, it's an opportunity. And he talked about he had a spiritual awakening in his 5th step. Every step provides an opportunity to have an experience. And I just want to throw it out there. I had that same experience. My 5th step as well, where your 4th step, you do an inventory.
Sure.
Of your resentments, your fears, your sex inventory, sex conduct, so to speak. But we do a 5th step. And for me, you know, unlike you, I didn't share everything. But my sponsor came back to me and said, did you share everything? I'm like, yeah. And he knew me well enough, because he knew himself, to call BS. and he shared some of the stuff that he didn't want to share with his sponsor. And a lot of it was very closely related to the same kind of stuff I was hiding and taking to the grave. That man showed me real courage that day. And because of his example and being willing to disclose that stuff, I then had the courage to do the same and reciprocate it. But like for me, that was an experience. I wouldn't say my spiritual awakening happened in the fifth step.
Sure.
However, like it's just case in point that like working those steps, every step provides an experience, and one of those experiences can be the one that you're walking down the hall and the walls are glowing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's be willing to do the work.
Sure.
Is what it comes down to. And I just, you know, I'm an AA guy through and through, 12-step guy through and through, and I've heard too many powerful stories to deny that the guys that dive into that stuff, I mean, it puts the power into their story as far as I'm concerned.
Sure.
A couple things before we wrap up. So you got out of prison when? You said right before COVID. So what, like February, March 2020-ish?
End of 2019.
End of 2019. So how's your relationship now with your sons and stuff like that?
So the relationship with my sons is a lot better now. When I first got out, I would say there's a little bit of guilt on my end. You know, I didn't feel like a good father, and I'd kind of let them just kind of come to me. It was probably the best thing I could do, honestly, at the time. Talk to them. You know, my oldest son lives with me. I actually have a 1-year-old granddaughter. I'm a 39-year-old grandfather now.
Whoa,
So.
Hang on a second. Yeah, that's right, because you had your first son at 18.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he lives with you now?
Yes.
And you have a granddaughter?
Yes.
Okay.
So I have a good relationship with them, and, you know, I have another chance. You know, due to my recovery, you know, my kids might have seen me high and drunk, but my granddaughter doesn't have to.
That's great. That's amazing. And how old's your other son?
So my other son's going to turn 16 in April. So it's time for him to start driving. He's in Miami, so I go down there every so often. Last time I went down there, I let him kind of test drive my car to get used to like getting his learner's permit. He was a little nervous, so.
Well, if you can drive in Miami, you can drive anywhere.
Yeah, that's for sure. Tom still can't drive in Miami. I'm scared to death riding around with him down there.
Dude, you're scared to death riding with anybody.
That's true.
He's a nervous Nelly. He gets in the car. Literally, I just pull out and like I don't know. He gets so
Miami's a
bent out of
different
shape.
breed.
So I guess we'll just end with this. Your story's powerful. It's, if anything, I hope the listeners get, you know, the sense of hope, obviously, and it doesn't matter who you are, what you've been through, the situations, the cards that you've been dealt. Like, you were facing 30 years in prison, and here you are today, sitting with us, recording a podcast, published a book, certified addictions counselor, helping countless amounts of people. The proof is in the pudding. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter who you are, what you've been through, you can do this. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, Gio, I mean, listen, honestly, I really appreciate you coming on, and you know, we can definitely record again down the road because, you know, I know you're going to be doing a lot for the recovery community, and looking forward to it. Ben, any final thoughts?
I want to hear more about that fear stuff, and just to reiterate what Tom said, I only met Gio last week, the week before, for the first time. The man that you presented last week and until today, I would have never guessed you had a story like that. People can change. It's people's lives can turn around in ways that, I mean, when I spoke with him last week for the first time, meeting a stranger, I'm like, the way that this man carries himself, this is someone that I want to be around. You would never guess that he lived his life. And people say that about me too. They're like, I can't imagine you in active addiction. You sure that's your story? You know, we see this stuff all the time. Never lose hope. Whether you're in active addiction yourself, trying to get sober, early recovery, whatever the case, or a loved one, know that this is possible. Don't lose hope. Hope.
Yep. All right, Gio, thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you guys for having me.
All right, that is it for this episode of Real Recovery Talk. Thank you for tuning in the end. If you want to reach out, you can always email us, Tom at realrecoverytalk.com and Ben at realrecoverytalk.com. And in the end, what we're trying to do is help you turn your mess into your message. That is it. We will see y'all later.